I'm Mark Kerrigan, and this is Forgotten Urban Histories, a podcast that uncovers the extraordinary stories buried amongst and beneath our cities. Every street, every wall, every underground passage has a memory carved into it. Tales of ambition, faith, invention, and obsession that time tried to erase. From hidden catacombs to abandoned railways, secret societies to visionary builders, we'll travel beneath the modern world to rediscover the strange and the overlooked, the layers of history that have largely been forgotten. In this episode, we descend beneath the streets of Paris into a hidden city of stone, a vast labyrinth built from the remains of 6 million Parisians. We explore how overflowing cemeteries collapsed into chaos, how the dead were moved under torchlight through a sleeping city, and how the bones of ordinary people, washerwomen, plague victims, revolutionaries, soldiers, became the quiet foundations of the modern world above. Along the way, we'll witness how the catacombs were rediscovered by poets and artists, by the French Revolution in the Second World War, and by generations of explorers who still wander forbidden tunnels in the dark. Forgotten Urban History invites you into the silent kingdom beneath the City of Light, where Paris continues to stand on the shoulders of the seen and unnamed. 6 million Parisians, none with a name, but every one with a life. Paris wakes early. The cafes open, the streets hum, and beneath it all, deeper than the metro, deeper than the basement and the sewers, the dead still sleep. To reach them, you must descend through a narrow doorway on the boulevards Saint-Jacques. It looks ordinary enough, a small green gate behind a wall of limestone, but once you pass through, the light falls away almost instantly. The stairs spiral down and down, first 20 steps, then 50, then 100, until the noise of the city fades to nothing but the scrape of your own shoe on stone. The air grows cool and dry. You begin to smell dust, the dry, chalky breath of rock cut centuries ago. The walls close in. The last echo of your steps climbs the staircase and is gone. Down here, time feels slower, the past closer. You start to hear faint drops of water, the distant sigh of air moving through the tunnels. Then the passage opens and you're standing inside the bones of Paris. The space feels impossibly vast. Long corridors stretch in both directions, their ceilings low and their walls lined from floor to shoulder height with human skulls. Femurs stacked like bricks, jawbones mortared with dust. The yellow-brown sheen of age coats everything like varnish. There are no names, no plaques, just endless repetition. Faces that once walked the same streets above, now reduced to geometry. The catacombs run for more than 200 miles beneath the city. An empire of the dead arranged with an engineer's precision. Each wall, each pillar, each corridor built from what were once people. An architecture of humanity reshaped into order and pattern. You pass through the threshold marked in stone. Arrête, c'est ici l'empire de la mort. Stop, this is the empire of death. Beyond it, silence becomes something almost tangible. The tunnels twist and narrow, chambers widening like lungs beneath the weight of a city. Every sound seems to linger longer than it should. A single footstep might echo back seconds later, as though the stone itself is remembering you. Somewhere above, a car passes over the boulevard, a muffled vibration, barely perceptible. Down here, it feels as though the living world is the illusion. This quiet kingdom is the real Paris. The city of light, built upon the city of bones. Each skull was once a person, a voice, a life, a story. These were the bakers and the washerwomen, the soldiers and the priests, the merchants and the children. Victims of plague and war. Some died in the city's revolutions, others simply of hunger or of time. Their names were forgotten long before their bones were placed here, yet they still inhabit the structure of the city, its literal bones. But in the catacombs, they've been stripped of individuality and rearranged into a single organism. Millions of Parisians made into the very foundations of their city. Who were they? How did they come to be here in the dark? And why did a civilization so obsessed with beauty and progress build such a monument to its own mortality? That's where our journey begins, in the echoes of footsteps beneath the City of Light, where 6 million stories lie unnamed in the stone. The story begins not in darkness, but in daylight, in the heart of 18th century Paris, when the city above began to rot from within. By the mid-1700s, Paris was bursting at the seams. The dead had outnumbered the living. For centuries, Parisians had buried their loved ones close to home, in churchyards, cloisters, and parish cemeteries that clustered within the medieval walls. The oldest and largest was the Cemetery of the Innocents, beside the Les Halles markets, a mass grave so deep that by the reign of Louis XVI, bodies were stacked in layers like geological strata. The ground had risen higher than the streets. Wooden doors bulged from the pressures of the graves behind them. In summer, the stench of decay drifted through the market stalls, mingling with the smell of meat and fish. Milk soured, wells turned foul. Residents of the Rue de la Lingerie reported fainting when the wind changed direction. It wasn't horror that closed the cemeteries, it was public health. In 1780, after heavy rain caused part of a mass grave to collapse into a neighbouring cellar, the Council of State declared that the central cemeteries of Paris must be closed. But closing them was one thing, moving the dead was another. And the question was, where will they go? Beneath Paris lay the answer. A second city long forgotten. The ancient limestone quarries that had fed the building of Notre Dame, the Louvre, and the bridges of the Seine. Centuries of excavation had left a labyrinth of tunnels running beneath the left bank. Many were dangerously unstable, threatening to swallow whole streets. The solution was as practical as it was morbid. Reinforce the quarries, sanctify them, and fill them with bones. In 1785, the first transfers began. Each night, under the cover of darkness, black-draped wagons creaked through the streets carrying exhumed remains from the Cemetery of the Innocents. Priests walked ahead with torches and swung censers of incense. Behind them, labourers stacked bones like firewood, whispering prayers as they descended into the quarry mouth at the Barrière l'Enfer, the gate of hell. Night after night, the same solemn procession wound its way through the sleeping city. Femurs, skulls, ribs, and vertebrae, the anonymous architecture of humanity, were carried below and tipped into the dark. By dawn, the wagons returned empty. By the next sunset, they were full again. What began as a desperate act of sanitation slowly transformed into something larger. The first inspector of quarries, Charles Axel Guillemot, saw beyond necessity. He imposed order on the chaos, straightening walls, numbering corridors, and supporting ceilings with new masonry. He called it a catacomb after the Roman burial chamber beneath the Appian Way. In his mind, Paris was not simply burying its dead, it was rebuilding itself upon them. Over the next 30 years, the bones of millions were moved. Every major parish cemetery within the city walls was emptied. Saint-Laurent, Saint-Nicolas-de-la-Champs, Saint-Eustache, Saint-Laurent. Each shipment was blessed and catalogued, not by name, but by district and date. The process continued through the Revolution and Empire alike, as the city grew and the ground beneath it filled with the past. By 1814, when the last major transfer ended, the catacombs stretched for kilometres, a subterranean museum of mortality. What had begun as public hygiene had become a philosophical monument to the fragility of civilization itself. Above ground, Paris glittered, the cafes, salons, and boulevards of the Enlightenment. But beneath the gaslights and gilt facades lay an invisible reflection. 6 million Parisians, stacked and silent, holding up the city that had replaced them. The City of Light was literally built upon the City of Death. By the turn of the 19th century, the catacombs were no longer a chaotic dumping ground for the dead. Under the steady hand of Charles Axel Guillemot, they became something deliberate, structured, ordered, even beautiful in their symmetry. But Gilmore's death in 1807 left behind a labyrinth still largely unseen, its corridors unadorned, its purpose uncertain. His successor, Louis-Étienne Henricat de Thury, would change that. An engineer, a scholar, and a man deeply shaped by Enlightenment ideals, Henricat believed that the catacombs could become more than a civic necessity. They could become a place of reflection, a space where art, reason, and mortality met. He envisaged the ossuary not as a tomb, but as a kind of subterranean cathedral, a moral landscape carved from death itself, each skull and bone transformed into a symbol of equality, humanity, and the passage of time. To him, the catacombs were not a horror, they were the great equalizer, a reminder that all distinctions of class, wealth, and title end here, beneath the earth, arranged side by side in perfect order. Work began in earnest around 1810. Henricat widened passages, reinforced ceilings, and carefully arranged bones into patterns. He introduced symmetry, rhythm, and design. Long walls of skulls and femurs forming what he called architectural facings. Between these geometric designs, the remains of thousands more were piled behind, filling the chambers like the foundations of a building. By torchlight, visitors began to descend into the catacombs. At first, these were only officials, scholars, and foreign dignitaries, curious minds drawn by the novelty of walking through an empire of the dead. But as the decades passed, the ossuary became something of a macabre attraction, a mirror to the city above. In 1815, Henricat opened the catacombs officially to the public. He lined the entrance with stone plaques inscribed with the quotations from scriptures and philosophy. Their words were neither comforting nor fearful. They were reflective, stoic, and almost serene. At the first turn in the passage, "Stop! This is the empire of the dead." Further along, he etched into the limestone, "Happy is he who is forever faced with the hour of his death and prepares himself for the end." Each inscription was carefully chosen, a moral compass for those who dared descend. The catacombs, he believed, should not terrify, but educate. They should remind Parisians of the balance between progress and decay, ambition and humility. Visitors described the experience in hushed tones. They carried candles that spluttered and hissed in the damp air, their light glinting off the polished surface of the bones. Some spoke of awe, others of melancholy. Many left small offerings, flowers, rosaries, written prayers tucked between the skulls. It is said that the air itself seemed to whisper as if the voices of the dead were caught in the stone. Artists came too. Painters sketched the arches of bone. Writers scribbled notes in the candlelight. Victor Hugo, Balzac, and Théophile Gautier all visited at various times, calling the catacomb a city turned inside out. Where Paris above was filled with laughter, perfume, and the clatter of carriages, this one was still, perfumed only by time. In the quiet of the ossuary, Henricat found something closer to reverence. He believed that every civilization must eventually face the question of what to do with its dead, and that answer, if done with care, reveals its soul. For Paris, the answer was order, to turn death itself into design. By the 1830s, the catacombs had taken on their familiar appearance. The clean-lined corridors, the carved inscriptions, the walls of bone so precisely arranged they resembled mosaic art. They became a symbol of Enlightenment rationality, meeting mortality head-on, no longer chaos, but composition. And yet, beneath all that symmetry, the question remained. Who were these millions of people? The citizens, the mothers, the children, the unknowns whose bones built this quiet kingdom. Each skull represents a story erased, each chamber a crowd of forgotten lives. To understand them, we must travel further, not just through the tunnels, but back through time, back to the cemeteries from which they came, back to the lives that once animated the bones, now stacked in silence. Beneath the pavements of Paris, 6 million lives lie reduced to silence. Most will never be named, never remembered, never prayed for again. But bones don't lie. They tell us something about who these people were and the world they inhabited before the earth closed over them. If you listen closely enough, the walls begin to speak, And this is what they might say. The year is 1348. Paris is a city of around 200,000 souls, the largest in Europe, proud and prosperous, yet shadowed by famine, superstition, and war. The Hundreds-Year War has begun. Trade is uncertain. The Seine stinks of waste and hides from the tanner's quarter. She lives near Les Halles, a washerwoman, 40 perhaps, though the years and the labour have aged her faster. Her name, if it was written down, has long been lost. Every morning she drags baskets of linen to the riverbank. She kneels in the freezing current, beating clothes with wooden paddles, scrubbing until her knuckles crack and bleed. Soap is expensive. Lyle burns her hand. Still, she works, for pennies, for bread, for her children. Then one spring, rumour spreads of a sickness from the south. Ships from Marseille have carried it north, a fever that kills within days. People whisper of a punishment, of poisoned wells, of God's wrath. When it reaches Paris, it comes like a storm. The dead pile up faster they can be buried. Bells toll until ropes fray. She lasts perhaps a week. A fever, a swelling in the neck, a blackening beneath the skin. Neighbours drag her body to the cemetery of the innocents, already overflowing. Priests can barely keep up with the rites. Pits are dug through the night, layer upon layer, lime poured between the bodies. For centuries she lies there, compressed with thousands of others beneath the heart of the city, her bones absorbed into the city's history, kings, wars, revolts, reformations, until one night in 1786 the ground gives way. Her remains, like millions of others, are lifted from the muck and carried by torchlight through the streets. Now she rests in the cool dark beneath the boulevard Saint-Jacques, the mark of toil still visible in the curve of her bones. A washerwoman of the plague years, anonymous yet enduring, part of the first generation of the unnamed dead who would become the foundation of modern Paris. 4 centuries later, the same quarter still hums with life. Paris in the 1770s is a city of contradictions, enlightenment and poverty, perfume and refuse. Les Halles is called the belly of Paris, a marketplace that never sleeps. The air is thick with the smell of garlic and damp earth. She was born into this world, the daughter of a cooper, perhaps, or a butcher. She married young, as most did. By her mid-20s she had children to feed, debts to pay, and laundry to carry. Each morning she rose before dawn, carrying bundles of cloth from the market stalls to the communal washing pools. Work was constant, and conversation was her only luxury, talking of rising bread prices, gossiping about philosophers, or whispers of unrest. By the 1780s, the mood of the city was changing. Pamphlets passed hand to hand, speaking of liberty and rights. But for her, those ideas were distant abstractions. What mattered whether there was enough flour for bread? When the rains came that summer, the Cemetery of the Innocents, her local churchyard, began to collapse. The smell was unbearable. She might have seen the wagons at night, covered in black cloth, escorted by priests, chanting psalms as they carried bones to the new ossuary outside the city. She would have crossed herself as they passed, grateful that the dead were finally being laid to rest. A year later, in 1788, she died, perhaps of childbirth, perhaps of one of the fevers that always followed the floods. Her parish, St. Eustace, buried her quickly, but within 2 years, revolutions swept through the city. Churches were closed, graveyards seized, and once again the dead were moved. One night, her remains joined those processions she once watched, the same route, the same chanting, a journey from the heart of the city into the darkness below. Now she rests along the corridor marked St. Eustache, 1788, a woman of the Enlightenment in name only, part of the generation who kept the city running while philosophers debated above their heads. She did not change history, she carried it, and in a sense, she still does. The air grows heavier. It is the summer of 1792, and Paris is a powder keg. The monarchy teeters. The guillotine has become theatre. Crowds fill the square, chanting the new songs of the Republic. He was 30, a clerk at the notary's office near Rue Saint-Antoine. Educated, modest, proud of his penmanship. Like many of his generation, he believed the revolution would bring equality, that reason and virtue would replace privilege and superstition. But the revolution devours its own. When the September massacres begin, the prisons overflow. He is accused of sympathy for the old order, of hesitating to denounce a former employer, of saying the wrong thing to the wrong man. Dragged from his cell at La Force, he is taken to a courtyard already slick with blood. The trial lasts seconds. A name is read. A shout answers. And a blade falls. His body joined hundreds in the pits of the Madeleine cemetery. Priests, nobles, artisans, soldiers, all stripped of titles, stripped of identity. A few years later, the ground of that cemetery collapses. The lime pits, heavy with history, are emptied. And once again, the remains are carried through the streets to the catacombs, another quiet migration beneath the noise of revolution. His skull now rests near a plaque that simply read, Madeleine, 1792. No tricolour, no epitaph. But his story endures, not as a martyr or a villain, but one of countless ordinary men swept away by ideals larger than themselves. In the catacombs, the revolution achieved its purest equality. The monarch and the mason, the peasant and the philosopher, all reduced to the same silent pattern. And then there is the young man from the law. Born around 1789 in the last year of the monarchy, he grows up in a France forever at war. By 16, the empire is in full stride. Conscription laws reach every village. Every able-bodied male between 20 and 40 must serve. He was a farmhand's son, used to the rhythm of planting and harvest, to the creak of oxen harnesses and the smell of hay. When the letter came, he kissed his mother goodbye and walked to the nearest town to join the regiment. He had never seen Paris, only heard of it, that shining city where emperors were made and history was written. Within months he was on campaign, perhaps in Spain, perhaps in Austria, maybe even in Russia. For soldiers like him, glory was a rumour. The reality was mud, frostbite, hunger and fear. Typhus swept through the ranks like fire through straw. Contaminated water, lice and unwashed clothes spread it faster than bullets ever could. If he was wounded, it was not in battle, but on the long marches home. Feet wrapped in rags, lungs filled with smoke, the dead lining the road like milestones. He might have reached Paris in an army wagon, delirious with fever, admitted to the infirmary at Les Invalides, among the thousands of others. Doctors worked by lamplight, their instruments unclean, their coats stiff with blood. Amputation was common. Survival wasn't. When he died, they buried him quickly behind the hospital walls. He had no family there, no stone, no inscription, just a number in a ledger. Years later, when the Invalids' cemetery were cleared, his bones were moved again, down into the catacombs in a corridor marked Hospital des Invalides, 1808. He had marched across Europe for an empire that barely knew his name, and yet, in a strange way, he achieved a kind of immortality. He became part of the architecture of Paris, one of the millions of anonymous supports that holds the city together. These 4 lives, a washerwoman, a mother, a revolutionary, a soldier, are only 4 threads in the tapestry. Multiply them by 1,000,000 and you have the city itself, its labour, its love, its violence, its endurance. The catacombs are not a grave, they are memory made solid, a record of humanity's simple truth that every life, no matter how small, becomes part of the world it leaves behind. For more than a century, the catacombs lay silent. The city above grew heavier. Railways, gaslights, cafes, crowds. But down here, nothing changed. The air remained cool, the walls sweated faintly, water dripped in patient rhythm marking the passage of years. Paris forgot the dead, as cities always do, until one day curiosity began to scratch at the surface again. By the mid-1800s, word of the ossuary spread once more. Writers and scholars whispered of an empire beneath the city, a library of bones that rivaled Rome itself. The inspector of quarries opened the main passages, this time for study. Scientists came to measure humidity, artists to sketch by candlelight, poets to look for metaphors in the dark. By 1857, official tours resumed. Wealthy Parisians descended in tailored coats, clutching candles and lace handkerchiefs against the smell. They called it the Underground Voyage. It was half pilgrimage, half entertainment. They marvelled at the symmetry of death, of how neatly it could be arranged. A few even picnicked amongst the skulls, unaware that the same families who once walked these streets now supported them from below. But public tours covered only a fraction of what existed. Beyond the lit corridors stretched a world no one mapped, no one guarded, no one claimed. In the decades that followed, the forgotten sections drew a different kind of visitor: students, soldiers, dreamers. They entered through drainage shaft, sewers, cellars, and maintenance hatches. Once inside, the city disappeared. They called themselves cataphiles, lovers of the underground. They brought candles, bottles of cheap wine, and the thrill of discovery. In the 1890s, some built altars from loose skulls and lit votive candles stolen from churches. During the 1920s, artists held clandestine meetings here, sketching and reciting poetry amongst the bones. They said the silence helped them think. Over time, these wanderers left their mark: charcoal drawings of faces, initials carved into the limestone, fragments of song lyrics and hearts scratched beneath anonymous skulls. The bones watched quietly, as they always had. Then came another kind of darkness. In 1940, Paris fell under German occupation. The catacombs, vast, unmapped, and invisible, became both a refuge and a threat. For the French resistance, they were a natural hiding place. Tunnels beneath the 14 arrondissement became meeting rooms and radio outposts. Leaflets were printed in the candlelight, their ink staining the same stone that once carried the dead of the Revolution. Couriers memorised routes, marking them with chalk arrows and whispering code names. At the same time, German troops established their own bunkers in the catacombs, command posts beneath Denfert Rocher, thick-walled, ventilated, secure. For a time, both armies shared the same underground city, the occupiers above, the rebels below, separated by little than a few metres of bone and silence. When liberation came in 1944, the catacombs emptied once again. The candles burned out, the dust resettled. But the echoes of those who had fought, hidden, and printed in the dark lingered in the air. Peace brought curiosity back. Through the 1950s and 60s, new generations of explorers returned with torches and maps of their own making. Students of philosophy from the Sorbonne descended after lectures, claiming the tunnels as a classroom of another kind. They called it the Republic of Silence. Each chamber had its own name: the cathedral, the beach, the crypt of the muses. Photographers captured flickers of candle lights against walls of bone. Musicians recorded the acoustics of the chamber, turning death into resonance. Some came to escape the city, others came to find it. But then, in 2004, police stumbled upon something extraordinary. Beneath a false wall in an abandoned section, they discovered a fully equipped underground cinema. A projection room, a bar, a small restaurant, even working electricity, and a handwritten sign that simply said, "Don't look for us." Whoever had built it had vanished, leaving behind only chairs, wine bottles, and reels of forgotten films. It was a perfect echo of the catacombs themselves, a hidden world beneath a hidden world, created, used, and abandoned in silence. Today, the official entrance welcomes 500,000 visitors a year. They file down the same spiral staircase, breathe the same cold air, and stare into the faces of strangers who lived centuries before. But beyond the barriers, the deeper catacombs still exist. Kilometres of tunnels, unlit and unguarded. The true underworld of Paris. Every night, somewhere below the cafes and traffic, a handful of explorers still walk those forbidden corridors. They map new sections, restore carvings, or simply sit in silence with the dead. For them, it isn't morbid, it's communion, with history, with art, with the raw material of the city itself. And so the story continues. The catacombs began as a cemetery, began as a monument, then a refuge, and now finally as a canvas. Each generation finds its own reflection in the darkness. Soldiers, poets, rebels, lovers, all drawn to the same quiet heartbeat beneath the city of light. So the next time you walk through that grand old city, remember, some of its greatest stories can be found beneath your feet. And on that note, our next journey takes us to another underground world as we travel from Paris to Naples to discover a hidden tunnel carved for a king, a secret route beneath a palace, and a vanished wartime shelter that became a time capsule for the 20th century. We're visiting the Bourbon Tunnel. I'm Mark Kerrigan. See you next time on Forgotten Urban Histories.